Hi, Gary.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the FAA's Drone Advisory Committee meeting on Zoom. We are also live streaming this meeting on the FAA's YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook pages. Before we start the DAC meeting, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping items. First, we ask that everyone remain muted during the presentations. After each briefing, there will be an opportunity for the DAC members to engage in discussion and ask questions. Because of the large size of the group, we ask that you first raise your hand using the Zoom command on your dashboard. I will be moderating and we will monitor the dashboard and call on you to begin speaking. Second, a reminder that this DAC meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording will be archived and will be made available for future viewing on the FAA's YouTube channel. Lastly, our FAA team is monitoring the live stream. So for those of you on Zoom, if you have problems at any time during the meeting, please just make a note in the comments, which is also available in the Zoom dashboard, and we will assist you. Let's get started. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the FAA's Deputy Administrator and DAC Designated Federal Officer, Dan Elwell, for his opening remarks and the official statement of the Designated Federal Officer. Dan?
Hey, thank you, Gary. Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to all the members of the DAC joining us virtually from all over the US, and to attendees joining us on the live stream. As always, before I begin my opening remarks, I have a few procedural items to go through. As the designated federal officer for the DAC, I'd like to read the official statement. It goes as follows. In accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, this advisory committee meeting is open to the public. Notice of the meeting was published in the Federal Register on September 11th, 2020. Members of the public may address the committee with prior approval of the chairman, and this should be arranged in advance. Only appointed members of the advisory committee may vote on any matter brought to a vote by the chairman. The public may present written material to the advisory committee at any time. That concludes the official statement. Now, before turning our attention to today's agenda, I would like to introduce a very special guest. The Secretary of Transportation, the Honorable Elaine L. Chao, has a video greeting for us. Now, Secretary couldn't join us for today's virtual meeting, but she recognizes the important work of the DAC and the drone community, especially during these uncertain times. So, without further ado, we can play the video.
Karam, if you could please, there you go. Thank you.
Welcome to the October Virtual Drone Advisory Committee meeting. We want to thank everyone here, including committee members and those who are watching via the FAA social media channels. This has been a busy year for drones, and it's been a very busy time for the Drone Advisory Committee. During the past year, the committee has provided recommendations on so many important drone issues, unmanned aircraft system security, UAS facility maps, remote identification, Part 107 waivers, and UAS traffic management. This is a big task. So this past June, the FAA posted a solicitation for the nomination of new committee members in the Federal Register. The FAA is reviewing 75 applications to fill the 6 vacancies on the committee. This will bring the committee up to its full strength of 35 members. We look forward to reviewing these recommendations and adding 6 new members to the committee, so help is on the way. Now, let me share some thoughts about the UAS Integrated Pilot Program. It ends this month, and it's yielded valuable insights into the risk of many different types of operations and how to address these risks. It's also helping us determine the best ways to engage with local communities and gain support for drone operations. IPP participants have conducted thousands of flights involving medical and other types of package deliveries, damage assessments, aircraft inspections, and other missions. And here's some examples. The first, Part 135 air carrier certificates for drone package deliveries were issued to UPS Flight Forward and to Wings. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma improved pecan crop harvests using drones. Drones found that many trees suspected of suffering from plant disease actually had healthy growth in their upper branches. This knowledge led to a 200% higher yield from these trees. 2 North Carolina IPP participants, Flytrix and Zipline, used their IPP experience to provide COVID support. A Virginia IPP participant, State Farm, operated over people and beyond visual line of sight to safely conduct roof and infrastructure damage assessments following Hurricanes Florence and Michael. It was subsequently granted a nationwide waiver that also allows pre-damage assessments. Drones also reduced the response time of the Chula Vista Police Department to 911 priority calls from 6 minutes to a little bit over 2 minutes. It's also used drones with loudspeakers to provide health information to isolated homeless communities. Although the IPP is ending, we expect to continue to work with state, local, and tribal governments through partnership agreements. This will allow us to address the remaining drone integration challenges, such as flights beyond visual line of sight and detect and avoid solutions. Let me end by calling attention to the 2nd National Drone Safety Awareness Week, due to take place the week of November 16th. Last year's campaign was a huge success with 128 events in 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, plus more than 2 million social media impressions. This year's event will be completely virtual. Our hope is that with the support of all the members of this committee, this year's safety awareness campaign will be just as successful. Thank you for your work.
Well, once more, I want to thank our secretary for sharing that message with us. And I'll now bring our attention back to today's agenda. Today, we're going to hear DAC recommendations on safety culture from Task Group 8. led by Captain Joe DePete and Steve Jangelis from ALPA. In addition, we'll have FAA presenters provide responses to the DAC's previous recommendations on facility maps and UAS traffic management, or UTM. We appreciate the hard work these task groups and FAA teams have done to complete their reports, while also dealing with issues related to the COVID-19 global emergency. And after the presentations, we'll have an opportunity to discuss and issue a new tasking to the DAC to come back with recommendations focused on altitude remote identification, low altitude remote identification operations. And we'll close out today's meeting with an opportunity for the DAC members to highlight any new business or recommend future agenda topics. Now, the final housekeeping item is the approval of the meeting minutes from our June 9th, 2020 meeting. These minutes have been posted on the DAC website and were also included in the read-ahead material for this meeting. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the June 19th DAC meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any objections to the motion to approve the June 19th, 2020 meeting minutes? Okay, hearing no objections, the motion has passed. And before I turn it over to DAC Chair Michael Chasen, I want to say again, thank you, all of you, for all the hard work the members of the DAC and task groups have put in these last few months. I know how hard it is as we're in the middle of the pandemic and trying to keep all of our companies and our activities and our employees motivated and up during this time. So thank you. At the June DAC meeting, I announced that we had begun a solicitation effort for new DAC members to fill our current vacancies. And as you heard the secretary just say, we received 75 applications at the end of the initial 60-day solicitation window, which closed on August 18th. So we're coordinating our recommendations with Secretary to fill the 6 current vacancies on the DAC. And we hope to have any new members in place for our next DAC meeting early next year. So I've been very, very impressed by the quality of the candidates I've seen applying. And I'm also encouraged by the dedication and commitment of everyone in the drone community to ensure continued success of our drone integration efforts. An ongoing priority within the agency is the work being done to finalize the remote identification of small UAS and the operations of small UAS over people rules. On October 2nd, we transmitted both final rules to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs for interagency review. And we continue to plan on publishing those final rules in December 2020. So not being in the office hasn't stopped us from keeping a hectic pace. As you all know, we had our annual FAA UAS symposium virtually this year with 48 total sessions and over 1,500 attendees from throughout the drone community. I hope that many of you were able to attend the digital events that were held in July and August, and I hope you came away with useful information. We've already begun planning for next year's symposium. In the meantime, we're busy gearing up for our 2nd annual National Drone Safety Awareness Week, November 16th through the 22nd. I encourage all DAC members and everyone viewing today to participate either individually or through their organizations in making this year's event an even bigger success than last year. And during last year's National Drone Safety Awareness Week, again, as the secretary mentioned, there were 128 reported events in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico, plus over 2 million social media impressions. This year's events will be completely virtual, but based on the success from the symposium, we anticipate this event to still be a bigger success than last year. So thank you again for all your hard work. And now I'd like to turn it over to DAC Chair Michael Chasen for his opening remarks. And thank you, Michael, for your dedication and your hard work on the DAC. Michael?
Thank you, Dan. It's great to see everyone again. I'd like to personally welcome all of the DAC members from around the country to our second virtual DAC meeting, and also give a big welcome to all of those viewing the live stream. The United States and the world at large continues to face an unprecedented challenges associated with the spread of the coronavirus. Many industries have been hit hard by the events of the last 6 months, and aviation is no exception. While we face a long, hard road ahead to recovery in the coming years, we have seen many positive steps taken by lawmakers, regulators, and private industries. Then we know that we can now come back stronger than ever. In the last 6 months, we have also witnessed the positive potential of drone technology to aid in public health crisis through providing more resilient supply chains and by offering a mechanism for people to receive goods through socially distanced drone delivery services. The FAA DAC members Wing, UPS, and Amazon, and the broader work conducted by this committee are directly contributing to the development and deployment of these innovative use cases that will positively impact society and help us meet the challenges brought on by COVID. And although many of our DAC member organizations have been impacted severely by COVID, our work has continued over the last few months. I'm looking forward to receiving the Safety Culture Task Group recommendation today, and to also receiving feedback from the FAA on the previous facility map and UTM Task Group recommendation. Thank you again for joining us today. And with that, I will ask Captain Steve Jangelis from the Airline Pilots Association to present the Safety Culture Task Group recommendation.
Thank you. On behalf of the Airline Pilots Association, President Captain Joe DePete, I'm Captain Steve Jangelis, the Aviation Safety Chair for the Airline Pilots Association. Captain DePete was lined up to open this final report, but unfortunately, he got caught in presiding over our biennial ALPA Board of Directors meeting, which for the first time in almost 90 years was a virtual event. As we've all experienced, the Zoom meeting format isn't always the easiest to work with under Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure. As our organization tallied votes and did our business, the time-consuming and legally required counting added more time to the agenda. It was scheduled to adjourn last evening, but after working into the wee hours of last night and well into today, Captain DePete is unfortunately unable to be with us. He sends his deepest regrets and respectfully wishes us a productive meeting. Joe also sends along his well wishes to each of his fellow DAC members and hopes that you are doing well in these very trying times. I would not be at all surprised if you were to tell me you've seen ALPA in the news, working very hard to ensure that the airline industry has an adequate supply of trained and operationally proficient pilots that will be needed to bring our economy back to full strength as quickly as possible. Joe and our team have literally put their entire focus on the immediate task of dealing with the pandemic. But he really wanted to be here today and be a part of this discussion. He wanted to express a great deal of excitement about the excellent work of this task group. So I ask that you please allow me to read his prepared remarks. My fellow DAC members, Task Group 8 has been hard at work developing safety culture recommendations to address the FAA tasking that we received earlier this year. Please let me remind you that the journey to develop a meaningful and effective safety culture has been underway in the airline industry for years. And so we need to look at this activity and these recommendations as the next right step in that journey for the drone community. Over the course of several decades, before there was an unmanned aviation segment, the aviation community developed a robust and mature safety culture that we know today. We, the entire industry, including the FAA, employees, and company leaders, did that by building relationships, establishing trust, creating educational materials, and taking lessons learned from both our failures and our successes. It wasn't that long ago that an aircraft accident was the starting point for many analyses, findings, and the development of safety changes to prevent the next accident. It was purely reactive. Now the voluntary safety programs such as Flight Operations Quality Assurance, FOQA, and the Aviation Safety Action Program, ASAP, are important collaborative tools that enhance aviation safety through the analysis of voluntarily reported safety events and discrepancies that lead to the prevention of accidents and incidents. Our friends in air traffic control have their own version of ASAP. It's called ATSAP, and I'm sure that my fellow DAC member, Patricia Gilbert, with NATCA can tell you how important the ATSAP program has been for her rank and file members. More recently, we have seen safety management systems, or SMS for short, enter the discussion for airports, manufacturers, airlines, and even single aircraft operators in general aviation and the rotorcraft communities as well. In other words, we, the entire aviation community, now strives to be proactive in identifying risks that lead to accidents and incidents. Being proactive requires all elements of the operational community to work together. This includes FAA, corporate leaders, manufacturers, and frontline employees. It should be no surprise to anyone, we have seen the airline safety culture framework come shining through during the current COVID-19 pandemic. It's clear that in order to maintain and ensure the safety of passengers and crews at all times, we must continue to work together and embrace the changes. So that brings me to the Task Group 8 and the body of work that they have done. With the documents being presented today, the drone community has demonstrated that they are willing to learn and adopt from the safety culture that has made manned aviation, both general aviation and the airlines, the safest it's ever been. Way back before we knew that a pandemic was approaching, the FAA tasked the DAC to answer the question, what are the ways we can help the drone community fully adopt the safety culture that is so ingrained in manned aviation? In order to answer this question, the DAC established Task Group 8 and invited me to have a leadership role. I was happy to do that because, as you could probably tell, this is one of my most passionate areas of aviation safety. As president of the Airline Pilots Association, leading our organization representing 59,000 pilots at 34 airlines through unprecedented times with the COVID-19 pandemic, I asked ALPA's safety chairman of our air safety organization, Captain Steve Jangelis, to take the lead in this tasking on my behalf. I can tell you that the men and women of Task Group 8 have worked tirelessly to explore and develop meaningful and actionable recommendations from 4 primary users groups' point of views. I am very proud of the teamwork and professionalism that went into this effort, and I know these recommendations will be informative and meaningful in helping the FAA and drone community develop and mature a safety culture they can be proud of. And with Joe's comments there, we'll go ahead and work into our opening remarks. Please allow me to continue right into the briefing. And at this time, let's go to our first slide and start the executive summary review. First, I would like to add my personal thanks to all the members of Task Group 8 for their teamwork. TG8, much like the DAC, is made up of members from diverse backgrounds and experiences in both aviation and safety programs. Yet all viewed this as an opportunity to learn, to understand each other, and work towards a common goal. So with that being said, let me walk you through a set of slides that outline the process that we used and summarizes the framework of the document that you received in advance of this meeting. I'm sure that you've had a chance to read the document and you may have a question or two about some of the contents. But if you'll allow me to walk through the document overview first, then I'll be happy to answer any questions. Once I finish the overview of the document, I've asked several of the committee leaders to brief a portion of the report, so your questions may also be answered by them as we walk through this briefing. So I don't have a lot to say here because the slide text says it all, but the background section of the report does help a new reader understand how this set of recommendations came about. Safety Culture Task Group 8 was established at the February DAC meeting. Next slide, please. If you could back up one slide, please. Thank you. The 4 subgroups were created along the lines of operational communities. Each of the 4 subgroup leads organized their subgroups and held weekly WebEx, Zoom, telecom meetings to develop and refine the safety culture tenets. One thing that I recognized early on was that there was truly an interest by each member to take advantage of the opportunity that the FAA has given the DAC with this tasking. While there was some questioning at first about how the FAA could help their particular industry segment with the task of creating a safety culture, the dialogue we had together as a large group and the dialogue that each subgroup had did forge a path forward that resulted in concrete and meaningful recommendations. Next slide, please. Here's a list of the team members for TG8. It's comprised of over 25 members and subject matter experts from the DAC. This group worked together to develop both the structure and content of this report. Next slide, please. Here once again is the FAA tasking for Task Group 8. I'm sure we're all familiar with it by now. Our focus in each of the subgroups was on developing recommendations and ideas to assist the drone community in adopting an aviation safety culture. It also included ideas for motivation and suggestions for industry and government involvement. Next slide, please. The TG8 report is broken into two main sections. The first section, the executive summary, is where we discuss the FAA tasking and the development of the TG8 structure and highlighted recommendations from the 4 subgroups. And in the second section, that is, the body of the report with 4 subgroup reports. Next slide, please. You'll recall from the DAC meeting this summer that we started with first things first, getting everyone on the same page by achieving agreement and consensus on the tenets. Then the big lift, the recommendations for each segment of the drone community. Next slide, please. The executive summary. The tenets became the foundation to build on. They are scalable and adaptable to fit the application. Next slide, please. In the early planning of the safety culture recommendations, we found a need to establish a set of common safety tenets or truths that all members could agree to and support. As I said a moment ago, I was here before you in June to discuss those tenets and to let you know as part of the progress report that we had forged a consensus on the foundation from which to build our recommendations. I'm happy to say that the foundation created has remained strong. Next slide, please. More of the tenets are listed here. Next slide, please. And these are the last of the tenets. If we could back up one slide, please. One more. Thank you. And forward one slide, please. You probably noticed when reading the document that each of the 4 subgroups worked separately to develop their own recommendations. The recommendations showed, as no surprise, a number of commonalities and of course a few differences, but all of us agreed that one size does not fit all. Next slide, please. As you can see, trust, education, and operator ownership rang true as commonalities across the 4 subgroups, all core principles from the safety tenets. Next slide, please. The differences were based on application by user group, not the need for a safety culture, but how to develop and apply one. Noting the recreational and small operators groups saw the need to foster and promote safety culture from the grassroots, while the traditional and national UAS groups would leverage their experience and focus on procedural safety aspects. We'll now transition our briefing to our subgroup presenters to discuss their recommendations. I'd like to ask Captain Houston Mills from the traditional manned subgroup to get us started. Over to you, Houston.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So very excited to participate in this very important study. As we know, this activity really will lay the foundation for the full integration, and certainly we know that Dan and the administrator that you guys are very interested in. So from a traditional perspective, what we tried to do, our approach was really to take those tenets that Steve alluded to and really integrate them into recommendations that would help at every stage of the integration process. So we really took a holistic view as we look at what we currently do very successfully and to share those recommendations with the FAA. So they're based on decades of experience And certainly we believe that they'll positively contribute to the eventual full integration of UAS into the national airspace system. So next slide, please. So one of the recommendations, probably the number one, quite frankly, we talked about the safety ownership and the learning culture. In traditional aviation, the hallmark of our safety culture is this sense of ownership. And that's owning your own commitment to safety practices, to being prepared, to understanding what those requirements are. It's not only from a user perspective, it's from a manufacturer's perspective. A commitment to the regulations. It's all those stakeholders committing to own things. And each person actually needs to understand, what that looks like. That ownership starts off with, being prepared. It's a full stake. If I'm going to participate in this organization, there's got to be a level of trust that was referred to, but also this ownership piece. So that's one component. The other piece that's very important, and that is this ongoing education. Our culture itself is based on ongoing education. So if we go on to the next slide, those two components, safety ownership and the learning culture, are very instrumental. And so as we think about this, we know this is right in the FAA's wheelhouse because this is what you guys do all the time with us. And that is, how do we leverage this existing, not recreate to will, but use existing programs as a way for our UAS partners to develop at different stages. Obviously, the ASAP program is out there, the National Aviation Reporting System. These foster ownership from the perspective of it's voluntary reporting. There's a sense of owning mistakes without fear of reprisal, very critical in this process. We know, for those of us who've been in aviation for a few decades, that it's a continuous learning process. We believe that in this community, it's very important that we establish that once you become an expert, once you get a license, once you become a certificate holder, the learning doesn't stop. It's an ongoing learning culture. So one of the thoughts that we have for different tools for the FAA to consider would be different types of certification, things that allow individuals and operators to continue to validate their knowledge, to continue to grow and to grow in these certifications. I know personally, as a licensed 757 captain, and the multiple type ratings that I have on my license, there's a great sense of pride. And every year when I go back to validate that knowledge, continues to demonstrate not only the sharpness of my knowledge and all the folks that operate, but also a commitment to learning and making sure that we're committed to that safety process. In addition, risk management, seminars, all the things that the FAA are doing now contribute to this ongoing learning culture. And I think, as was alluded to earlier with the AUVSI and FAA UAS symposium this summer, over 1,500 participants, is a great indication of how successful that has been. Next slide, please. And so this, the second recommendation, again, two subtenants, they're real big. One is trust, and this whole concept of a system-wide approach. So we won't belabor the trust piece, but that's something that really kind of comes out. And this trust, and I hate to say it, sometimes there's a natural distrust, particularly when you're talking about regulatory oversight. But for safety and the safety culture advance, we have to move beyond that. We have to create vehicles to allow for people to openly communicate and share information. And it's got to be viewed from a system-wide approach. It's got to be viewed from the perspective of, hey, how do I contribute to the overall NAS so the overall NAS can learn and get better? So that becomes with a common understanding of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and quite frankly, holding each other accountable. Not only individuals holding each other accountable, but also making sure that others are doing the right thing. And certainly this partnership, this sense of partnerships through memorandums of understanding and other vehicles that provide a safety net where trusting relationships and conversations can take place. Next, please. So this system-wide approach is just so important because as much as I would love to just learn from my operation, and certainly I can customize things, it's important that we share information with the system. And so when it comes to data sharing and everything else, with this evolving technology, there's a lot of proprietary information out there. So MOUs such are established in our FOCA programs, our Flight Operation Quality Assurance programs, and others will need to be established to allow for the community to advance and share data that advances safety. And certainly as we look at CAS, we know the USAT is out there now. That's a wonderful venue to continue that. Personally, we believe that having the USAT members to participate in CAS meetings, to start that information sharing, cross-pollination will be important. But then also to bring the UAS community into the FAA Aviation InfoShare. For those of you who might not know, the industry comes together a few times a year with an incredible display of informational sharing. People airing their dirty language or laundry together for the benefit of learning for all. And so there's existing programs today that can help operators at a variety of stages of their development in this industry to continue to benefit and really latch on to this system-wide approach. Next slide, please. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, and it depends on where folks are. We know, as I mentioned, there's a couple 135 certificates. Obviously, there's a lot of manufacturers. There's organizations that are growing into this space so that we can advance it collectively together. So the executive leadership and organizational values certainly have to be at the DNA. And if you look at the safety management policies, and really what these type of commitments boil down to are commitments. They're commitments to ensuring that the organization are going to do the right thing. They're consistent with the organization being committed to the mission and being aligned with the regulatory processes, but also the safety principles that are important to the people as well. It's a core value perspective. So from an organizational perspective, as we continue to integrate, leveraging the very same types of commitments that our SMS policies have created as a benchmark, which is very closely aligned to those core principles for those who are building UASs, those will be managing the airspaces, those operators will be operating them, all those individuals, all those things can very much align with this commitment to executive leadership and organizational values. And we believe the FAA should kind of craft policies and craft thought processes around these very things. Next, please. So when we think about these tools, I mean, as I mentioned, there's UAS, the SMS processes, advisory circulars, certainly these basic principles in terms of, well, what are those minimum recency of experience? What are those weather minimums? All those organizational things, because as we know, there's an operational pressure that comes along in aviation. But if those organizational values are aligned and they're scalable, then it really helps to guide the organizations and the individuals within the organizations to make those right decisions. And that's really where the safety culture begins to fall in. Because in spite of operational organizational pressures that will surely come around in terms of organizations needing to serve and needing to do things, that commitment to those values will allow people to call timeouts within that framework to make sure that they're aligned. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our recreational subgroup team and thank our partners as well for their commitment to this process. So thank you.
Hi, good morning. This is Rich Hansen, president of the AMA. I'm not sure if we've switched over yet. I know that they were expecting this to be presented by Chad Boudreau, our executive director. My apologies for that. I'm going to go ahead and sit in for him this morning. I want to thank Houston for his presentation and Steve for helping lead this task group. Houston, if you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me. Okay, great. But anyhow, this presentation was going to be done by Chad Boudreau. He and I co-chaired the subgroup, and he put a lot of time and effort into this. Unfortunately, his mother has been suffering from a long illness, and she regrettably succumbed to that illness this morning. So Chad couldn't be with us, and our thoughts and prayers are certainly with him. And we want to thank him for all his contributions to this work. And I'll do my best to pinch hit for him in this presentation. The recreational subgroup also had a lot of crossover from the small commercial UAS operator subgroup. So there was a lot of collaboration between the two groups and pretty much consensus on the recommendations that came out of both groups, although obviously the perspective is slightly different. The recreational subgroup represents all the UAS operators, regardless if they operate within a community-based organization such as the AMA, or they're operating independently as an individual operator. And the subgroup recognizes the varying levels of risks which exist in the UAS operation, and importance of education and
educating the new and existing users on how to safely share the national airspace. Aside from the nefarious acts and outlier incidents, the subgroup could not identify a repeatable history of significant safety issues to mitigate. Therefore, the subgroup recommendations focus on how the FAA can educate, reduce the potential risks, and build a rapport and trust with the recreational operators while integrating into the national airspace. The subgroup recommends that the FAA leverage existing safety programs that have been successfully demonstrated with over a century of safe recreational UAS operations. Next slide, please. Excuse me, the FAA should work with community influencers, those people that have significant recognition and influence within the grassroots communities in an effort to build trust among the drone community. The FAA should work with the well-respected, trusted, and influential operators to champion a safety culture. Many of you may know that, especially from within the recreational community, many of our national aerospace leaders have emerged and are on the prominent aviation stage. Influencers within the UAS community include those with large followings on social media, event coordinators, community-based organizations, hobby shops, retailers, and many other entities. The subgroup strongly recommends the FAA participate at UAS recreational events and foster a learning culture. The FAA should attend events with the primary intent of education and trust building, and not to impose their authority over the community on regulatory and policy matters. Next slide, please. The FAA should further integrate recreational UAS manufacturers, community-based organization, and recreational stakeholder leaders into its advisory and policy processes, so that this long-standing evolving segment of recreational aviation has an equivalent seat at the table to segments of the manned aviation. More robust bidirectional collaboration is crucial to build trust and help the drone community fully adopt the safety culture that is so ingrained in manned aviation. And I think it's important here to repeat a concept that Steve talked about, in that one size does not fit all. And though we're talking about adopting a safety culture similar to that that's already been maintained by the manned community, it not necessarily emulates it element by element, but that it adopts those safety tenets that we've all brought forward, and that is the backbone of a safety culture system. Actively learn and implement stakeholder guidance from those that have successfully created a safety culture and record. The FAA should identify and collaborate with community-based organizations, as with other civil authorities in England, Canada, and Australia. Other organizations such as England, Canada, and Australia have already done. There is certainly a need to globalize a safety culture and a methodology for operations, which is certainly undergoing now with JARS and EASA and other elements that are working with ICAO. We also need to recognize safety modeled by leadership and celebrate recreational achievements. And again, as I mentioned previously, one size does not fit all. Next slide, please. Recommendations 1 and 2 will capture a large portion of the recreational community. Moreover, the subgroup believes the FAA must also reach individuals outside those communication channels. In addition, the FAA should educate the general public to help promote a culture of safety through a greater understanding and acceptance of UAS. Safety should always be the underlying message in all communications. Recreational UAS messaging should not be heavily focused on the negative actions or risks caused by outlier operations. It should avoid negative training. The tone should be positive, as it is in the manned community, and should partner with existing platforms and other educational entities. I think it's fair to say here that the effort should be to create a more adoptive and accepting mental state within the general public for UAS operations. Unfortunately, up to date, there has been somewhat of a negative connotation, and the mere presence of a UAS in the airspace brings up concern and suspicion. I think that needs to be addressed through this recommendation. Next slide, please. Actually, I think at this point that ends the recreational subgroup's report. And if nothing
would be
else, I'll
me,
pass
Rich.
this over to, go ahead.
To Dave Messina. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll pass it over to Dave for the small commercial subgroup report.
Thank you, Rich. My name's Dave Messina. I'm the president and CEO of the FPV Freedom Coalition. As you've heard and as we've talked about, the FAA Drone Advisory Committee draws on a diverse set of skills to research the action items and respond to the FAA with thoughtful recommendations. Now, this subgroup that we're talking about, we called it the small commercial subgroup, and it represents companies who use drones and have fewer than 500 employees. So maybe there are 2 drones, maybe there are 3, but it's a smaller company. So the members in this subgroup numbered about 20 and represented both general aviation as well as UAS. And we spanned associations, manufacturers, operators, and operator organizations. Now, as you've heard it a number of times, here's the question that we're all looking at, but I've found when we're working on groups like this, it's good to put that question in front of ourselves each time we're thinking about it. So the group's question from the FAA was, what are ways we can help the drone community fully adopt the safety culture that is so ingrained in manned aviation? So given that, the focus of the subgroup's recommendations centered on ingraining best safety practice as a mindset within a small company who uses drones. Now, we researched articles from industry, we researched regulations, association training. We invited a guest in for a speaker from AOPA. We ran a survey for drone operators and social media platforms. We listened to feedback and we read a number of academic papers as a point of reference. Now, one of the papers that really struck us was from the Department of Psychology at Rice University, where they discussed the safety culture and identified these 7 factors shown in this blue text box on the top of the slide. And so as we talked about it, each of us in the subgroup felt we really could relate to either jobs or hobbies where safety was integrated in the philosophy and the psychology of the organization. So after we researched these issues and documented our assumptions, we concluded that there were 3 assertions that we could make as a subgroup. The first is that UAS commercial operators have a predisposition that the FAA prefers a non-confrontational approach when first addressing minor or inconsequential safety violations. Now this is important because it sets the context between what we believe the trust that should exist and does exist between the FAA and the commercial drone operators. The second point, UAS commercial operators' perception of drones evolves as they become more experienced. As they gain experience, they take drones more seriously and they see them as an aircraft, not a novelty. And the third was that UAS commercial operators seek emergency procedures. Now this, as well as several other points, surprised us on the subgroup. So this was a recurrent requirement from UAS operators in small companies. So from this work, we created 3 recommendations which are proportionate to risks of UAS flown by employees of small commercial companies. Next slide, please. So our first recommendation has to do with UAS education using the existing FAA safety team or FAST team. There's an existing outreach arm of the FAA called the FAST team, and it's focused on making the skies safer through education. We feel the FAST team's mission aligns well with what we've been working on. Their mission is to reduce the nation's aviation accident rate by convening safety principles and practices through training, outreach, and education, while establishing partnerships and encouraging the continual growth of a positive safety culture within the aviation community. So it's our recommendation that the FAA expand the FAST program to more thoroughly include UAS education. Now, we feel this is necessary in all places, not just high-risk regions. Now, the numbers in the United States as of late September indicate that there are over 195,000 certified Part 107 remote pilots. Of those, about 67,000 or 35% have accounts that utilize the FAA safety.gov resources. Now, that percentage includes individuals that have general aviation certificates. This means the FAA has the opportunity to educate a lot more folks who only have UAS certificates. And to cite what Rich Hansen was talking about, there's an opportunity here to educate recreational pilots whose number in the United States are approximately 7 times larger than the Part 107 certificate holders, or approximately 1.3 million. To expand upon a FAST program, the FAA needs to update their National Performance Plan, which gives direction to the 78 Flight Standards District offices. FAST program managers can then work with their volunteer teams to create programs aligned with the FAA directives. Part 107 certified pilots should receive WINGS, that is, pilot proficiency credit, toward their pilot record for completed FAST programs. Other incentives, such as reducing the renewal fee or auto-renewing Part 107 certificates based on accumulated WINGS credits, we think should also be seriously considered. So looking at this, there are a number of benefits that come out of utilizing the existing FAST program. Those benefits are the cost is reduced, workload is distributed, and improved programs can be shared across regions. And the UAS operators benefit by gaining access to the FAA recognized educational content by enhancing their personal pilot record and by being exposed to the general aviation community's safety conscious mindset, which includes a lessons learned capability. Next slide, please. Second recommendation is a safety culture self-assessment. Now, putting ourselves in the position of a drone operator of a small commercial company, we considered safety sensible metrics. What could the FAA advise a drone operator who, say, is the only drone operator for a company who designs and manufactures grain silos? We want this drone operator to feel part of a larger community of drone operators. And we want this operator to understand where they sit in terms of how far along are they on that continuous education path to improve their company's safety culture. From this, we borrowed an idea that's used across the United States in municipal fire and rescue companies. They use a simple safety self-assessment. Now, our small commercial subgroup recognizes the challenges of accurately scoring a self-assessment. Yet, we felt the benefits are warranted, and a self-assessment could provide a view of, oh, I'm doing fine, or, oh, I better work on my safety practices. So this directional metric would be not only of value to those completing the self-assessment, but it would guide content creation at a national level. And a self-assessment could be used to create consistent training across the varied industries, and that improves the hiring capability of UAS operators and building on the foundational philosophy of continuous improvement for safety training, which is another manned aviation principle. Next slide, please. Okay, our third recommendation was around a flight risk assessment tool. Now, this recommendation proposes a simple checklist for every flight by a drone operator in a small company. There are several things going on with this recommendation. First, manned or general aviation uses checklists as a way of life. Books like Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande explain how the use of checklists help minimize errors and optimize safety, and it's used in hospitals, manufacturers, and of course, manned aviation. Next, the idea of a checklist enables the UAS operator to halt or not fly when risk is too high. Now, this aspect of the flight risk assessment tools is captured in part of the FRAT that has to do with external pressures. So consider for a moment the example where a client has hired the operator to inspect the hull of a ship after welding and prior to painting or coating. Any delay is expensive, and the client is insistent that the UAS flight happen immediately. A flight risk assessment tool can inform the UAS operator when the risks are just too high and provide a consistent language to the client to postpone a flight to a time when the flight can be performed safely. This subgroup is aware that several LANC-based applications use a FRAT today. Our recommendation is to require the LANC apps provide the same consistent brief FRAT, which would be viewed by the operator prior to each flight approval request. Further, it's the subgroup's recommendation to not have the operator fill in or submit FRAT information, but rather start to consider FRAT metrics to evaluate the risk of each flight. Now, that's it on our recommendations. I'd like to thank again the folks who participated in this small commercial subgroup. We met 13 times in weekly meetings. Really was a diverse team, and it helped us create these recommendations that we feel are practical and hopefully helpful for drone operators in small companies. I'd like to introduce now Todd Gretz of the BNSF Railway Company as the speaker for the national subgroup.
Thank you, Dave. So again, thanks to everyone that was on this task group and everyone who helped us along the way. And certainly, hopefully, the 200 or so of you watching online will find some value in these recommendations. I'm not going to repeat a huge amount of what was stated earlier, but I want to highlight a few of the key points here. When we say national, we're looking at it from our standpoint that our flight operations are national in scale, or at least in the case of the railroad, 28 states, soon to be 2 Canadian provinces, and we're operating as it's a de facto part of our day-to-day operation. It's really, to many railroaders, it's no different than a hammer or some other specialized tool that we leverage for certain operations. It's expected that the drone services and systems will be available to the wide range of situations that come our way. And case in point, major weather events here. We've had several in the Gulf, as everyone knows. Wasn't a question whether or not we'd have drones in the air, right? There would be drones in the air, or whether or not we're looking at a large section of track, it's assumed that there'll be a drone component somewhere. So it's a day-to-day regular occurrence. And it's all part of reducing risk from our operations, which means we would we wouldn't use a new tool to immediately add risk to our operations as a means of somehow reducing those risks, right? So anything and everything we do has to reduce risk to the operation. Of course, drones are no question, and they've proven to be quite effective. But we've had some advantages being a national operator in that we have existing processes, we have existing procedures, we have existing tools, manuals, and other items that we can use to make sure whatever we inject into our operations is safe and reduces risk. We have not just our own drone team; it's focused solely on the operations and utilization of the drone data, but we have an organization of natural oversight that looks at all forms of operation on the railway, whether it's aviation related or something on the track, right? So we have some natural capabilities that we can take advantage of, and it always assumes that the policies and procedures that we possess are complementary with any of the UAS specific policies and procedures and rules and so on and so forth. So those are some foundational elements when we say national, right? What we consider national, right? At any given day, maybe somewhere between 7 and 8 times a day, we have a drone in operation within that network of ours. And so we're looking at things from that standpoint. But we haven't forgot about all the potential users of BVLOS technology when it comes to national operations either. So next slide, please. So again, our number one recommendation is, wherever possible, leverage existing FAA safety management systems, rules, and procedures. And I'm not talking about the obvious, right? A Part 107 rule or a waiver, or some SAC and some COA. I'm talking about other systems and capabilities and features of the National Airspace System that could be applicable. Don't turn your back on existing safe systems just because we're talking about a quote unquote drone, right? Think about what's here, the time tested and proven technologies. And that's our mindset. Now, granted, there's some of those policies that are modified or adopted to keep in mind that we may not be talking about a 20,000 pound something or a 5,000 pound something, that we're talking about a 100 pound or less drone. But leverage those capabilities wherever possible. And we always assume when you're talking national scale, you're talking a large frequency of flights, you're talking about complex operations. So again, we recommend leverage active commercial and or general aviation pilots with some instrument ratings or even at least some instrument experience. All right. Again, my favorite master flight instructor, Gary Reeves, likes to say, mastery is the goal, not minimums, right? So invest in the type of operators and understand the complexity of the operation that you're about to bring to bear in the NAS, and make sure you're educating those operators properly. Now, here's where maybe I even differed with some of the people on our subcommittee and maybe others on the DAC. I also understand that not all companies maybe have the size and scale of my company, right? We're a 180-year-old company, operate in a lot of states, a lot of resources, a lot of capabilities. Maybe you don't need to have that level of complexity, but you still want to operate in some way, shape, or form, national or in a larger area. You can take a more graduated approach, again, as outlined by other task groups and more importantly by some of the tenants that were recently mentioned. There's a lot of fundamentals in here, very important to me, that are applicable to companies large and small. So again, I don't want you to think that I'm coming at this from a perspective as a national, large scale, huge enterprise mindset. I'm also thinking about those startups and smaller entities that have designs on scale, right? So take all of this, together as a holistic approach, please. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, one size fits all. You've heard this before. That's not the case in this operation. Look at things from a risk standpoint. Look at things from a performance standpoint, and then leverage the policies that would be utilized to develop requirements that are natural fit with the overall operation. And more importantly, with the established safety culture of the organization. So you heard Houston talk about that. And as a team, we spent probably more time on how you develop a culture that would support compliance, support transparency, support learning, support development as a means of establishing operational excellence, regardless of the size of your company, regardless of the size of your operation. It's very important that you fuse the safety culture and the operational capabilities or designs of your organization. And then again, I touched on this earlier, but especially if you're thinking about anything at scale, it will take consistent and significant training, governance, and continuing education opportunities. And we eat our own dog food here. So not only do we operate a wide range of line of sight and beyond visual line of sight systems, but we make those investments into our pilots, whether they be employee pilots or contract pilots. We make the investments in the training so that they're active current aviators in the NAS on both human-based aircraft as well as drone aircraft. But also we have governance, we have oversight. We audit what's happening. We have stringent recurrency requirements. We have things because we've been entrusted with a significant operation. As I said earlier, we're not using drones and inadvertently injecting risk into our operation. But we are making regular investments, no matter how junior or senior the pilot is, into those programs so that we just continue to further the capability of drones in the operation. And we think those fundamental values of the training and operational compliance are directly applicable to any operation, regardless of size. Next slide, please. So last part about this, again, we're not, of course, the only large scale operator. There are many operators in the NAS today using a wide range of systems, delivery or critical infrastructure inspection in our case. But whatever the case may be, I'm also a big believer that the large scale operators should use what we've developed where possible to educate other regional and local operators so that there is some consistency in operation. Again, a key benefit of this would be using our findings, our lessons, our materials, our plans, everything we've done as a way of streamlining what's done even at a regional or local level. So again, I might have national in scope, but I'm also thinking about those that might be wanting to use this same fundamental for a local operation or a regional operation. And of course, then we get some consistency across all of the training, and we get consistency within the industry and an understanding of just how important it is to infuse this type of culture and this type of approach into operations, regardless of size. And then lastly, it doesn't disadvantage smaller operators versus much larger operators. So anyway, that's what I had for my segment. And again, I cannot thank the other members of the task group enough. I've learned a tremendous amount from them. It was a great organization. Hopefully, this information benefits the FAA and the drone community in general.
Well, thank you, Todd. Much appreciated. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank you, Todd, Houston, Rich, and Dave, and thank you to all of our tasking group contributors listed here. At this time, I'd like to entertain any questions you may have and then proceed to a closing statement. Does anyone have a question for me or the subgroup chairs? And if the producers would like to arrange a speaker list or questions or raise hands, we'll go ahead.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand in the chat box and I'll call on you. I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, hang on, we have a question coming in. James Burgess from Wing, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick statement. First, I just want to thank the task group for all the work and all the recommendations. There was excellent content there. Just to call out a few things that struck me as quite illuminating and insightful. Rich, your comment that as you looked at recreational risks, you didn't identify any sort of continuing or severe risks or safety issues. And so you went into a positive direction of how can we just continue safety growth. I thought that was insightful and interesting for us to remember what we're trying to solve with these efforts. Always promoting more safety, I think, is encouraging and valuable for the industry. But I would love to hear more, perhaps at a future time or in future subgroups, about assessing that actual risk and what you find out in the recreational usage, given that there didn't seem to be any severe issues to respond to. So I thought that was a helpful context for this discussion. And Todd, especially your content as well, you mentioned performance-based and sort of risk-based quite often. And I think that's such a key thing, that these operations and these technologies are so diverse, and they're also constantly iterating, that one size fits all doesn't often work. And so I think it's a helpful reminder for us to keep flexibility in whatever frameworks we put forward. And one example for that, just to mention from our own experience at Wing, we're continuing to innovate on our system, and it is quite highly automated. And so the idea of leveraging manned aviation precedent or protocols, I think, is spot on. And then the question becomes, which ones? So using certified GA pilots or IFR rated pilots for complex operations, I think makes tremendous sense when you're asking that role to perform similar duties. And if you end up with a highly automated system in the future where the, I'll use air quotes, pilot role maybe is more of an overseer or a monitor or an air traffic controller, maybe we borrow from those areas of manned aviation and not just think that the PIC has to be a certified pilot. Maybe there's other areas in the manned community that can be more appropriate for the job and task at hand. So just wanted to add some context and some personal experience there from our operations. So I think the spirit and the intent is very aligned with where we'd like to see safety go in the industry, but also recognizing there's a lot of opportunity to be creative or apply things more risk-based or performance-based, as you mentioned. So thank you again for the excellent comments and the recommendations.
Thank you, James. We appreciate the comments as well.
Okay, Todd, I'll turn it over to you. You had a question or a comment?
I'm just going to add to that, and James, thanks for the statement there. The one thing, I think we found in our operations, which is critical, regardless of what we're talking about here, is that we have several classes of pilots at our organization. You start Part 107, and then of course you work your way up till you you may walk in with this, but you have to at least maintain proficiency and demonstrate this. You work your way up to private pilot, single engine land, then instrument rating. We have several commercial pilots as well, but that's more of what we call our senior BVLOS pilot. But to James' point, as things continue to automate, that's all going to merge, and that's something that's not lost on us. And I think that's something as an industry we need to embrace as well, right? Some of these, let's face it, I flew, I don't know how many hours in the last few months, and I don't know exactly how many minutes I flew that aircraft, right? I was trusting a lot of automated systems. And my knowledge on how to govern those systems and take over for those systems if they failed. So we do need to acknowledge that the industry is, especially the small aircraft, are moving into a highly automated future. We need to embrace that. At the same time, I think we don't lose sight on the training and proficiency standards And I think that, ends up benefiting the industry as a whole. So thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Trish Gilbert.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. It's more of a statement, I think, than a question. But as I was reading through this Tasking Group 8 work, really wonderful. I had that aha moment reading through the recreational recommendations. I mentioned at the June DAC that while the airline industry has had their safety culture, voluntary reporting, non-punitive ASAP for quite a while. The FAA has been in it about 12 years, which is, it's mature and we've come a long way. But there was a time, I've been in the agency for quite a long time, when it was very punitive and a blame game. And we have switched it to the positive instead of the negative, even to the point that very supportive with the FAA in recognizing great work by our workforce. And NACA itself does a Communicating for Safety conference and then gives awards to the best saves in the system every year, which Steve, thanks for your time at being a judge for those over the course of the years. So my point being is that I think we can all say we're probably more than a little bit guilty of using negative connotations when we've just been discussing emerging technologies and new users, things like the 3 C's, and I won't say it, but I think if we can all just commit to seeing it from the perspective that Rich put forth and their recommendations in a positive, and embracing the positives that they bring instead of the negatives, I think that will go a long way. Truly integrating them not into our system at some point, but integrating them into our policies, our processes, and our teams that look at the safety culture. So the work was wonderful. And that point, reading that really kind of took me back because I completely missed it. And it was so obvious. So thanks for the great work there. And subdividing that group, I think, brought those really diverse perspectives forward. So thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have, I want to turn it over to Dan Elwell.
Yes, I just wanted to, again, reiterate what everybody else has been saying. This is great work on the safety side. And I really like we don't have to juxtapose safety and manual flight to UAS. We join it, right? And with the same sort of, with the same passion that we have in manned flight, we should have in the safety of UAS flight. And I see that more and more every one of these meetings. I've been thinking today, listening to you guys talk, how much this committee, or how far this particular committee has gone. I remember the very first DAC meeting there was, and the concern in the manned flight area that, here's all these Silicon Valley and high-tech people. They don't know anything about aviation. They don't understand safety. And clearly, this notion has changed dramatically, and I'd like to just point out to everybody. I'm not sure. I think it was gentleman from BNSF who made the comment that we have to look forward toward when these operations, especially BVLOS, have fully automated. Well, fully automated operations are going to require as high an intensity towards safety as visual line of sight flying of UAS. In fact, even more so. So I think this is a well-timed presentation, and I really appreciate all the hard work y'all put into it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a comment or question from Greg Agvent.
Yeah, I just wanted to, not so much a question, but a comment and an observation. I really do appreciate the work done here. The presentation was, at least for us, Houston mentioned that he has a couple of decades worth of experience. Well, we only have a couple of years, and we had no safety culture when we started. But what I just heard from this from the group was kind of a confirmation of the work that we've done and the commitment that we made. And I think that commitment to safety is something that the FAA should note when you start thinking about more complex operations, when you start thinking about where we go as an industry. And speaking specifically for the commercial operators, the observation I had though was off of a comment that Todd made about mastery versus minimums. And I kind of, as soon as he said that, I started thinking about Part 107 and whether Part 107 was where it stood on maybe that continuum between minimum and mastery, and what doors could be opened for commercial operators if they had a demonstrated and continuous commitment to safety. Part 107 to me is more of a floor than a ceiling, and I think is open to a whole lot of conversation, perhaps as a DAC tasking on what's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. At this time, I'll turn it over to Jay Merkel.
Thank you, Gary. And Trish, thank you for those comments about just culture and being able to report safety events without fear of reprisal. And we still have a long way to go in terms of being able to comprehensively create the safety culture we'd like to see in UAS. But we are about to put the final touches on updating NASA's aviation safety reporting system to allow UAS reports and allow UAS pilots to have the same opportunity to provide those reports there, working in conjunction with the UAS safety team. And I think that'll be an important step towards that safety culture and the just culture, and looking forward to implementing that with the entire community, both the recreational and the commercial. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. We have one more comment or question from Mayor Troxel.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to thank everybody on TG8, and it was great to get involved with that in the conversations. And I just want to point out, and I think Rich did a great job, but I think safety culture starts with access to the sophisticated flight systems that we're talking about. So with the Christmas season coming up and Costco and Sam's and that sort of thing, and really where it's Part 107 a lot of times. So in Rich's presentation talked about the hobby shops, but also retail. But there's a lot of people that'll be flying equipment shortly. And so, how do we address safety at that access stage? So I just bring that up as a point of information, and that's where we get to large scale of UAS in the airspace.
Okay, thank you. We'll wait a little bit longer for anyone with a comment or question.
Hey, Gary, it's Houston. I just had one additional thought, and that was along the lines of what Jay, you just mentioned about the creating a pathway for UAS to participate in AR, the Aviation Safety Reporting System, which is great. Another thought along those lines, obviously there's a lot of voluntary programs such as ASAP, SMS. There's opportunities for different operators, particularly organizational, to adopt those. And I think we should also think about creating an accelerated path for anyone who has resources or is willing to kind of adopt some of these manned aviation type of programs to incorporate into their process as well. And so if there's an accelerated path as we're thinking about those things, I would think those would be good. And then lastly, I also wanted to acknowledge Lauren Cast, who was the co-chair of our subcommittee of American Airlines, and to thank him and the rest of the team for all their contributions. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone with any additional comments or questions?
Yes, Gu here. I've been trying to raise my hand for whatever reason. It has not been working. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
So first of all, as I know, most of you know, I no longer work for Amazon, so I represent my own interests on the DAC, and thank you for I appreciate that opportunity to sort of continue at least for this meeting. I love participating in this project, and I think the work is incredibly important. I would make two observations. First, that while I fully support the recommendations of the working group, I think the language of the tenants could be tightened a little bit to be more sort of implementable by stakeholders. Tenant generally, and a lot of you remember the tenant work we've done 2 years ago in the first DAC. Tenants should help someone think about what they're doing in a sense of do more of X because and do less of Y because. And the current tenants are more around what should you do, but it doesn't really explain what you shouldn't do and why you should do more versus do less. And I think that can be helpful. I'm happy to work with anyone on the working group to help maybe sharpen up the language a little bit. Second, I think one of the concepts I think I've seen as very useful in aviation safety culture is a culture of transparency. And I think almost by definition, I'd like to see a transparency tenant, one that talks about the value of being transparent, the value of even if you have something embarrassed that happened to you as an engineer or as a manufacturer, as an operator, or as a user, as a bystander, it's important that we share this information. So adding a transparency culture that drives a safe culture, I think is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Gert. Anyone else with any additional comments or questions?
Good morning.
I see a hand raised here. There you go.
Go ahead, Jazz.
Hi, good morning, folks. You know, from a team that is protecting the World Series right now as we speak from a drone security standpoint, I think it's important for everybody to understand the concerns of enterprise that are actually looking at drones quite widely. It's an interesting challenge we had, which was where is the drone space right now from a large enterprise perspective, if you think about some of these big teams. And I think that solidly they're seeing drones as a liability right now because, you know, interruption, broadcast, you name it, right, crashes into the audience. But we're fast seeing them being interested as drones as an asset going forward. And I think it's good for everyone to understand that the way they're seeing that is that they want to see trust. They want to know that, hey, there's a drone there and that we can trust where it's coming from. And they're looking at that. And I think one of the things I've heard time and time again was trust but verify. So they are looking obviously for these reporting systems and identity, which FAA is working on as well. I think one of the things we should really focus on also is on the verification side. If you look at air traffic control, right, you're trusting the pilots telling you what's going on, but you're also verifying with radar and systems like that. So one of the comments I'd make is that the industry is excited about the future of drones, but I think we have a long ways to go about trust and verify for those people.
Thank you. I understand our raising hand function feature on the dashboard is not working right now. So if anyone has a question, please just let me know in the comments and I will call on you. Is there anyone else with any questions or comments? Okay, hearing nothing. Any closing, Steve?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, for the great comments and great questions. A really good dialogue. And I got to tell you, I have learned a lot over the past months of working with the folks with the task group. I really want to thank Houston, Chad, Dave, and Todd for your hard work and helping me learn along the lines of, you know, where we're all coming from. And I think that's the key. And my eyes are opened. A lot of what each enterprise is trying to do and the benefits are out there and we can make this work all together. So I appreciate the opportunity to lead this group. Your willingness to roll up your sleeves and lead a team to make recommendations is truly foundational work. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mr. Mark Reed on my ALPA staff for his work in keeping this group informed and for his assistance to me. We all truly appreciate his support. We found ways that the FAA can immediately come alongside your segment of the drone community to improve safety. It is literally history being made. I know the ALPA members also thank you because we know the DAC recommendations on implementing a safety culture will help us do their job as safely as humanly possible. So it is with great pride that on behalf of Captain Joe DePete and all of Task Group 8, I submit the recommendations to the DAC for your consideration. Captain DePete has reviewed the document and endorses our work. Since he cannot be here to be the one to make the motion, I would respectfully ask one of the DAC members on Joe's behalf to make a motion to send the recommendations to the FAA. And for that exercise, I'd like to turn the microphone back to Michael. And I thank you for your opportunity to present today. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your hard work and the hard work that you and your team did in putting together these recommendations. At this time, I will entertain a motion to forward Task Group 8's safety culture recommendations to the FAA.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yes, a second.
The motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to forwarding Task Group 8's safety culture recommendation to the FAA? Hearing no objections, the motion to forward Task Group 8's recommendation to the FAA is approved. Thank you, everyone. Our next presentation is the FAA's response to Task Group 5's recommendation on facility maps. These recommendations were presented at the February DAC meeting. Bill Stanton, UAS Integration Lead from the FAA's Air Traffic Organization, will introduce his team and provide the FAA's response. Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group today, and I really appreciate the discussion so far. It's very interesting, and look forward to seeing the results from that. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation to refine the standardized grid spacing to 30 seconds of latitude by 30 seconds of longitude. Understanding the history, and I know this group does, but for the larger audience, our grid cells are currently 60 seconds by 60 seconds, which is the closer we move to the equator, approximately 1 mile by 1 mile grid squares. And we understand that, as we move forward and gain more efficiencies in our access, that is an impediment to doing that. So the FAA agrees that refining the standardized grid spacing, essentially dividing those grid cells for now into 4 different segments, will increase access for all of our UAS operators, greater speed of which getting those requests and access to the airspace. We formed an internal working group and we meet regularly. We're discussing the plans, and we have quite a few changes to our related policies, processes, and our system updates that are going to be required prior to implementing this recommendation. We've begun our initial discussions with our service suppliers, our USSs. We plan to implement the grid spacing refinement as part of our FY21 Lance upgrade cycle. That is planned for a completion in the late fall of 2021. So we agree wholeheartedly with the first recommendation from the DAC on dividing up those grid cells and increasing our access to airspace. Next slide, please. Incorporate a standard approach when reviewing and assigning grid square altitudes, ceilings in and around airports. So currently we have the UAS FMs that allowed us very early on in the implementation of CFRs 107 and 101 for our lower altitude commercial and recreational operations. We had to create something that got us access more quickly. We couldn't manually process the numbers and the volume of the requests that were coming in when the laws were instituted. So the FAA acknowledges that this recommendation for a standardized approach, we recognize that it's the right time to do that. Early on, we set a list of criteria where our local bargaining unit with our National Air Traffic Controller Association and our FAA air traffic managers out in the facilities would assess those altitude grid cells by looking at that criteria that we formed early on. It's time for change. We accept that, and we've recently formed an internal concept development work group that'll establish a scalable, quantitative, risk-based approach to determining these grid cell altitudes. The work group has developed an algorithm, and it'll generate optimal altitudes for each one of these grid cells based on multiple data sources. We include surveillance data, mitigations for certain other encounters, existing airspace restrictions. And I'd like to point out that we gather quite a bit of our information through our safety management system whenever we're developing our policy processes and procedures. As we develop mitigations to safety hazards that we've collaboratively identified with stakeholders both in manned and unmanned operations. Some examples of how we've used this information to determine the altitudes have come from those panels. We've enabled hundreds of thousands of UAS operations. We've worked on infrastructure, emergency response, and unique operations such as TODS over in BNSFs. We've made great progress for airspace access to our safety management system panels for recreational flyers as well, and I just wanted to point that out. Next slide, please. The algorithms criteria is currently under refinement. We've got a good tool that produces the outcome. What we are refining now is what goes into that. Currently, we have a lot of new UAS operations, and without existing standards on what kind of space and distance we would need between drones and other drones and UAS and manned flight, we have to really refine those grid cell and enhancements by what goes into them, and that will determine the outcome. So we're working with our local management teams, we're working with our bargaining unit, and when complete, this algorithm will be tested and we'll ensure that it demonstrates the performance that we're looking for prior to implementation in the rest of our UAS facility maps. Target implementation is for mid-2021 for this project. We agree, recommendation number 2. If we could, next slide. A pilot program. We're going to use some different language here, but we agree that a beta test is what we're calling it, is needed. We agree that prior to implementing anything, we need to run it through its phases and test cycles. As many of you remember, before implementing Lance, we tested it at 10 different facilities of varying airspace complexities, varying manned and unmanned operations. So we expect that this beta test will follow that same suit. We're going to test it at approximately 10 air traffic facilities. We'll have a broad cross-section of airspace complexity and a broad cross-section of UAS and manned operations. Details on the scope of the beta test, we're still currently under discussion, but we expect that we'll collect valuable data and analyze any potential benefits and any complexities that may arise from this prior to full implementation in our UASFMs and implementation into Lance fully. Next recommendation, or I'm sorry, next slide, please. Stakeholder and UAS facility map grid refinement team. As we understand it, there was a recommendation to put together a team that would determine those altitudes and the segments and how they're worked and decided upon. So we formed internal working groups and with some of our other stakeholders and discussed the plan for UAS facility map refinements. We view the grid cell assignments as a core air navigation supplier responsibility. It's a core government function to give those clearances. Grid cell altitude assignments are the equivalent to a clearance for us. And therefore, the issuance of that airspace clearance is not really appropriate to include or not include, but it's appropriate more for the ANSP to make the final decision on that. I believe that in previous discussions that we had discussed in previous slides, we're taking input from various places through our safety management system, through our discussions with our key stakeholders. With many of you, I've had discussions on your operations as you requested. So we take that input, and all of that is a value to us. But we believe that the final determination on the altitude choice resides with the ANSP and is a core government function. But, next slide, please. The altitude algorithm that's currently under development, as we've described, includes appropriate criteria to address the concerns mentioned in this DAC recommendation, I think. The FAA is planning to review that algorithm with the purpose of making any refinements as necessary. That feedback, every time we have a panel, every time we introduce a new operation, all of those things will feed into this discussion and on those maximization of altitude usage. So once operational, we'll continue those refinements. We intend it to lead to more dynamic and responsive updates to our UASFMs and to that inclusion into the Lance program. And next slide, please. I think that ends. That's the last of our recommendations and the responses to the recommendations. Michael, back to you for the discussion.
Terrific.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is there anyone any of the DAC members that have any comments or questions regarding the responses? If you have a question or comment, please indicate in the chat box. The function for the hand raise is not working right now. So if you have a comment, just let me know in the chat box and I'll call on you. Okay, I don't hear or see anything right now. Michael, I will turn it over back to you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. That completes the first portion of our meeting. We will take a short 15-minute break. DAC members, please remain logged into the meeting with your microphones on mute, and we will resume in 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. The DAC meeting will resume in 2 minutes. Please return to your computers and ensure your microphones are on mute. Thank you. Welcome back to the second half of today's DAC meeting. A reminder that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. It will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel for later viewing. Also, a reminder for DAC members, after the next set of briefings, there will be a discussion and Q&A period. We ask that you first raise your hand using your Zoom command on your dashboard. Unfortunately, that function is not available. So please, in the chat box, just type that you want to ask a question or comment, or that you're raising your hand, and I will call on you. Lastly, our FAA team is monitoring the live stream. So for those of you on Zoom, if you have any problems at any time during the meeting, please make a note in the comments, and also available in the Zoom dashboard, and we will assist you. Also a reminder, if you are not doing a presentation, to please put your microphones on mute. And our next agenda item is the FAA's responses to Task Group number 7's recommendations on UTM. Jay Merkel, Executive Director for the UAS Integration Office, will be the briefer. Jay, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. This presentation is the FAA's response to the UAS traffic management performance capabilities priorities, and we received these priorities at the June Drone Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, the DAC tasking was to review the UAS traffic management concept of operations. The DAC task group provided the FAA with a definition of the performance capabilities and detailed breakdown of those capabilities, and also a ConOps review. And there were 12 areas where they recommended we need more discussion and a very detailed matrix of comments. I very much want to thank this task group. I've been involved in many ConOps developments in the FAA. I've also been involved in the review of public comments against those ConOps and industry comments. And by far, this is one of the most thorough and helpful reviews of an FAA document that I've ever seen. So thank you. Next slide, please. The performance capabilities priorities. The first recommendation was that we work together The second recommendation is that we allocate our resources in alignment with the priorities. And I think the most important bullet is really, or the most important point was kind of captured in between even the recommendations, that the FAA and industry work together prior to publishing the UTM ConOps 3.0 and ensure that we got clarity from industry and from the users. Next slide, please. So again, our overarching response, thank you. Incredible amount of work and very, very helpful. We do concur with your recommendations and we agree with your prioritization. As it noted in the task group report or recommendations, we do need to work together. We will collaborate with industry and on the ConOps 3.0, and we're taking steps to set up interactive discussions to address all of the areas, the 12 areas, and then the stylistic comments and the specific comments. Next slide, please. And this is probably the most important part of our response and the part of the response that I'm most excited about. The FAA is working with NASA's Aeronautics Research Institute, or NARI, to set up a venue where the FAA can work with NASA and NASA can bring in the industry people to work with us and develop the content for ConOps 3.0, including the discussions on those 12 areas, the specific comments, and the stylistic comments. I'll show you a more visual schedule in the next slide, but we plan to complete this work in the fourth quarter of, it should say 2021, sorry, problem on the slide. We're targeting the discussions to be a bi-weekly cadence. And as I said, we will address all 12 areas. Next slide, please. So what, whoops, go back one, please. There we go, just stay, all right. So what do we plan to include in ConOps 3.0 in addition to the recommendations? The synthesis of our discussions with industry around the DAC identified topic areas, but specifically adjustments around recreational operations, airspace constraints such as UAS volume reservations, message and information security, and public safety and security operations. Those two areas, as Mr. Banga mentioned earlier, are getting more and more interest, and particularly around UTM. So we very much want to seek and get some input there. And security stakeholder information requirements, as well as UTM service updates. And here we have the correct year, which is 2021. Next slide, please. So we've been working in the background, assessing your comments and preparing for the discussions. We hope to engage you as early as November through NARI and finish up that work in March of 2021. And then go into an editing and review phase with a final release targeted for June 25th of 2021. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to open it up to questions and answer and any discussions from the DAC members.
Okay, again, just if you have a question, just let me know in the comment section and I'll call on you.
Okay, Gary.
All right, no one else. So Jay, I think I don't see any additional comments or questions from anyone. So we can move on to the next agenda item. And Jay, that's yours as well.
Yes, sir. I do want to thank all the members of the task group for their well thought out recommendations and members of my team for their hard work in coordinating the responses. At this time, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which is a discussion and issuing of a new tasking to the DAC from the DFO. And I will do the presentation. Next slide, please. So in March of last year, we issued a request for information asking the question, how might remote identification benefit the traditional aviation community in participating in this. And we really wanted to get a feel for how traditional aviation would receive and possibly use remote identification. And what we really hope to do was engage with those aviators who are typically operating in the same space as the majority of the UAS or drone community, and that would be 400 feet and below, largely in Class G airspace or in controlled airspace, but 400 feet and below. Next slide, please. We did get a very robust response. We got 30 responses, 11 of which were from Pilots Association and Public Safety Organization. And these were their comments. They pointed out that under Part 107, UAS have a primary responsibility to avoid manned aircraft. That was their view that remote ID was security centric, that adding remote ID capability would be an added cost for general aviation pilots in particular. And they were particularly concerned about task saturation during departure and arrival maneuvers. And they also recommended that any solutions be integrated with existing avionics suites. So next slide. When we carefully considered that, we felt we maybe missed the mark in communicating what we were looking for in the RFI. And we'd like to take a second chance at this, or a second opportunity to engage this community. So we'd like to ask the DAC to explore this opportunity and make some recommendations. Can remote identification be used to increase situation awareness between manned or traditional aviation that routinely operates at low altitudes away from airports and where UAS are operating in the same airspace? So the tasking is for the DAC to engage those operators, obtain feedback, and then also use that feedback and the responses we got from the RFI and create an integrated set of recommendations back to the FAA. Next slide, please. So I'd like to open it up to the DAC members for any questions or comments or discussion on that tasking. And Gary and Karam, if you could put the tasking back up maybe so we can have it as a visual. Whoops, there we go.
Okay, we have a comment from Rich Hansen.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Jay, a quick question. On the RFI that went out to the low altitude community, did that include communities like ultralights, paragliders, balloonists, those recreational elements that are down below 400 feet, at least, if not entirely, at least routinely? Were they involved in it?
It's a good question, Rich. We use the standard communication methodologies for requests for information. And I think that's part of why we didn't really get that community. I don't think they're monitoring the Federal Register and other publications like that to look for, hey, the FAA just asked me a question. And so I think that's why the DAC can be very helpful, because you have a better connection with those communities in terms of knowing how to communicate with them and get them engaged. And yes, Rich, those communities are, or those operators are the ones we'd like to get some feedback from.
Yeah, I think that would be important. I know from the model aircraft community, those are the other operators that we see and interact with most frequently in our airspace. So their input would be crucial, I think.
I agree.
Okay, our next question is from Christian Ramsey.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks. This tasking could be affected by any changes that may result in the final final remote identification ruling that might be different from the NPRM. Just given the timeline of that, I don't know if you can say much about that at this point, but given the timeline that this tasking will be occurring during a period while there may be changes made available, just some thoughts there that there might be some timing associated with.
Sure, Christian, that's a good point. And the FAA would be very receptive and flexible that if the DAC sees that the final rule significantly changes the ability to produce good recommendations on this tasking, we would certainly take it under consideration to continue the tasking further to give the DAC the time they need, just like we did with the safety culture tasking and the UTM tasking. So we're open to extending the time to allow you to formulate your recommendations to us.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Our next question is from Mayor Wade Troxel.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jay. My question, does this really route the dynamic interaction between low flying, obstacles, if you will, or what about ground-based system or stationary, obstacles, many of which won't move, but some do, cranes, portable towers, and other sorts of things. So is there any contemplation of things that are ground-based in this, or is it really just low altitude operation of manned aviation?
Good question. We typically think of remote identification as an electronic license plate for a drone. So this would be specific around how that electronic license plate might be useful to traditional aviation. Although the FAA could consider a future tasking around either the role of obstacles, or oftentimes obstacles are very much tied in with aeronautical information and charting. So we could consider that at another time, Mayor Troxel.
Hey, and Jay, this is Dan. As we all know, for the GA community, there's always been sort of an interest in mapping either via GPS or otherwise, high tension wires and towers. And we actually have requirements for structures above, I believe, and I could be corrected, but I believe over 200 feet and higher, or something to that effect, has to be lit. And obviously lighting structures is for visual avoidance. So to your point, Jay, having an emittance, some emitter that could be received radio signal wise to drone operators and to manned operators for stationary objects, to Mayor Troxel's point, stationary or moving, if cranes, but terrestrial objects that have a relatively high height, that is something to think about.
Absolutely. And to Mayor Troxel's point, several of the safety cases that I've been involved in where people want to do beyond visual line of sight, the temporary obstacles or transient obstacles are much harder to get your head around and figure out how to mitigate any hazards or risks associated with those in UAS beyond visual line of sight. So a good thought, and we'll take it in for further consideration, Mayor Troxel.
Thank you, Jay.
Okay, our next comment is from Mark Colburn.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mark Colburn from Dallas PD helicopter unit. I just retired, but I'm staying on as a reserve officer, a fully sworn reserve officer. I'm going to help our department finally get a drone program started. But Jay, I was one of the original 30 that replied to this RFI. And as you can imagine, I have very strong feelings about this. So I just wanted to say that I'm very much looking forward to participating in this project, and hope that we can come up with some good ideas. But my initial impression is that that like say putting another device in the cockpit of a helicopter. I've been flying helicopters for 40 years in a low altitude airspace, and I think putting another device in the cockpit that's going to warn of more traffic, especially drone traffic, I have problems with that because it could become a distraction for the pilot and keep their eyes inside the cockpit when they should be looking out the window. And that's my biggest concern behind that concept that's in one section of ConOps version 2. But then again, like I say, I look forward to working on this project. So
yeah, and Mark, I remember reading your comments. So
okay.
I do, but it also made me think about, okay, well, an extra device is just one solution. What
Right.
other solutions are out there to help that pilot who is possibly saturated or their attention is being drawn to many different things in a very difficult environment for them to operate?
Right.
But how is there a way to get them useful information, situation awareness that would be helpful to them? Or if
Right.
the answer is no, it's not, then we really would appreciate a definitive answer there as well.
Yeah, there's another provision in there too where the manned pilot, like say an ag pilot or a HEMS pilot, would announce their flight intent before taking off on a network connection. And I think that might work very well for, like, say, helicopter EMS, where the dispatcher would do a volume reservation for a scene, for, like, say, 15 minutes around a scene response. I'm not so sure if ag pilots are going to be too receptive to that idea.
Yeah, and we're open to ideas, Mark.
Okay, sure,
we really are.
Yeah,
and that's
well, like
why
I say, I look forward to this project. So that's
Yeah.
that's all I want. I would just want to comment on that at this point.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Our next comment and question is from Bob Brock.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Jay, I really appreciate your comment that we're going to be looking into, or I would offer that we need to look into getting more input and extending the timeline on this. In Kansas, as we build general aviation airplanes and work with the ag community, and as a helicopter guy, I will tell you that Mark has some very good points. There's very few things more rewarding than flying a helicopter at low level, and a few things that require more eyes out the windscreen instead of in the cockpit. But there are some interesting stakeholders that we probably wouldn't naturally look at the Federal Register, and that talks about the rural farmers and people like that really have a high potential of operating both UAS and their own air fleet of aerial applicators and things like that, that would have a unique insight and position on this issue of saying, how do we want to integrate the entire spectrum of aviation assets that are going to be doing activities on the ground? And that doesn't even start to talk about some of the windmills and other large things that may extend past the 400-foot AGL environment. So things like that, I think we really would be heavily engaged in helping to facilitate the communication on this. So let me know if we can do anything along those lines. But rural America really wants to engage every aspect of these, from helicopters to drones to the whole shooting match. So we're happy to help. So thanks for giving the opportunity to maybe extend this timeline a little bit and richen the response.
Well, thank you, Bob. Look forward to your input.
Okay, and Jay, we have one final question from Lauren Cass. Lauren?
Oh,
Hi, Jay. How you doing?
great. How are you, Lauren?
Good. I'm good. Hey, listen, I think this is a really good tasking, and just by the comments we've already received, I think it's going to have a lot of robust discussion occurring. There's no doubt about that. I do have a couple of questions or comments. So is the intent that these data would be, obviously it's going to be used by operators directly, but would the intent be that these data or the information be also available to ATC facilities and perhaps beyond that to other operators with something available, sort of a swim network type of approach? I think that's probably an unanswered question right now, but just a comment. And yes, I'd love to participate as well. This sounds like a good one.
Great.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions. One last chance. Oh, we have Mark Baker.
Yeah, I'm, as you know, representing the largest share of owned aircraft in the country. More devices after just finishing ADS-B be a very tough pill to swallow with any kind of significant adoption of new devices in the cockpit, as the other Mark pointed out. Pretty busy and pretty full. And again, there's so many different operations, whether they're backcountry, ag operations, spraying, helicopter pilot myself as well, seaplane operations, to be effectively down this path where the interpretation would be, on the operator of the fixed wing or the general aviation aircraft compared to, the old detect and avoid kind of thinking, I think is a bridge pretty far. So I'm not sure extending this is actually going to be helpful from an adoption. That's just my point of view.
Thank you.
Okay, Gerd Kimchi, please. You have a comment?
Thank you. Just an observation that on the complexity, I completely relate to the complexity of adding yet more equipage and things that are going to sort of demand the attention of a very busy pilot. And that's an incredibly important point. I would say that there is a potential way to interface with this with the UTM task, where the pilot in that manned mission is only alerted to remote ID enable entities when there's actually a risk, as opposed to all the time. And that connection to UTM, I think, is pretty important to go investigate. So I'm wondering if this is a part of this tasking, or this is a liaison activity with the UTM task. Thank you.
Gur, that sort of innovative and nuanced approach is exactly what we're hoping will come out of this. I think the initial concepts that either we put forward or people thought of had obvious problems. And, several folks, several of the DAC members have brought that up already. But maybe there are alternatives that we haven't considered thus far, such as participating in a service around that's driven by UAS traffic management that as of yet is not defined in UAS traffic management, and using that to help generate situational awareness only when needed, right? So yes, that the scope of this tasking, interacting with the scope of the UTM tasking, I think is, or the participation in the UTM CONOPS 3.0, that's a natural nexus, and I would encourage industry to continue to work on both sides of the problem.
Yeah, I would maybe react to this, and that potential needs to be added to the tasking statement, so it's very clear. The sort of lines of demarcation of a tasking statement can either help or hinder. Thank you.
And Gary, I need to make a correction. The RFI was published through the FAA's contracting opportunities, not through the Federal Register. Yet another reason why someone in, say, the ultralight community might not see it.
Okay, I'll note that, Jay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to call on Mariah Scott.
Yeah, we also replied to the RFI, and I just want to build on Gur's comment around the intersection between UTM and remote ID. We actually deployed a situational awareness system similar to, as Gur mentioned, with our customer, the Southern Company, where we were tracking helicopters and drones during their response to a hurricane. And we used live flight tracking, and the helicopters only needed to pay attention to that live flight tracking if there were actually UAS in the system or in that vicinity where they needed to work. So I think there is a lot of potential intersection between these traffic management concepts and remote ID that don't necessarily have to produce more of a situational awareness burden on the crewed aviators. So,
thank you.
I'm excited about this, happy to participate.
Great, excited to have you.
Okay, Jay, I'm not seeing any additional comments at this time.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll turn this over to the Drone Advisory Committee Chair, Mr. Chasen.
Thank you, Jay. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to accept the FAA tasking low altitude remote ID operations as outlined in the tasking statement presented.
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to accepting the FAA tasking low altitude remote ID operations? Hearing no objections, the motion to accept the FAA tasking low altitude remote ID operations is approved. It is my privilege to announce that James Burgess from Wing has agreed to take on the role of being Task Group number 9's chair. James and I will work with the DAC members and review recommendations on Task Group participants. Also, we will ensure we comply with all the policies regarding Task Group membership. The next agenda item is a discussion of the feasibility of creating a standing operations and technology subcommittee. I'd like to have Gary from the UAS Integration Office brief the subject to the members. Gary?
All right, thank you, Michael. Next slide. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Kolb, and I'm the Committee and Stakeholder Committee Liaison. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to talk very briefly about a proposal we want to present to the DAC about standing up a subcommittee that focuses on operations and technology. This would be a standing subcommittee, which is a little different than what we've been done in the past with the task groups, where we get where the DAC receives an FAA tasking and the task group is formed. And then once the recommendations are made, that task group is dissolved. We want to take the opportunity to create a standing committee with the same intent as a lot of the task groups, which is to leverage the expertise from the DAC members and the stakeholders so we can identify industry trends and help in the facilitation of UAS integration into the NAS. The output would be exactly the same. The subcommittee would provide recommendations to the DAC, and if those recommendations are approved, we would forward them to the Office of Secretary of Transportation and the FAA for integration into ongoing initiatives and programs, which is what we've been doing in the past. The membership, it wasn't mentioned earlier, but one of the policies that we're looking to implement is that for any task group or subcommittee, we're looking to have a 50% minimum of DAC members be part of that subcommittee or task group, and then the remaining 50% can be any non-DAC member once they've been approved by the Secretary of Transportation. And so this effort kind of streamlines that opportunity, so we don't take a whole lot of time approving new members, new non-DAC members into the task committee, the task groups and the subcommittees. Again, the structure works the exact same way. The core subcommittee would receive the tasking from the FAA through the DAC as outlined in the DAC charter. I'm going to open it up to any questions or comments on this. Go to the next slide. Are there any questions about the establishment of a standing operations and technology subcommittee? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor Troxel?
Yes, just a question. How do you sign up?
It'll be, we'll work with the DAC chair. It'll be the formation will be very similar to how the task groups are currently organized and signed up. And we'll work through those processes, but you'll hear more information from the DAC chair as we move forward with this proposal.
Thank you.
Rich Hansen, please.
Yeah, just for clarification, when we did the DAC prep calls, we talked a little bit about this, and it was my understanding that the reason we're going to this subcommittee is that the ruling that every member of the DAC and the DAC subcommittee has to be approved. And I expressed then a little bit of question as to how we would know that we get the right technical experts on the committees till we know what the task assignments are. My understanding that it could take a number of months to get a new member of the subcommittee identified, which could prolong a tasking activity by those same number of months. So can you clarify that? Is that actually the case now, that every member of a subcommittee has to be a DAC, an approved member for the DAC?
Any non-DAC member that's part of a subcommittee or task group does need to be approved by the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. And that's one of the reasons why we want to create the standing subcommittee. So we have a lot of subject matter experts from a wide, diverse community that can provide expertise. So we can streamline some of this process for once a tasking is received from the FAA.
I'm just follow up on that, Gary. I'm going to assume though that a task group, although the group itself has to be approved members of the DAC or through the DAC process, bringing in a technical experts to provide information, expertise to the committee may not actually be a member of the task group, but could still be called in to bring information to that group.
I think that's a perfectly valid assumption that's, you know, the requirement for approval would be only those approved to be members of the subcommittee or task group. So if there's a need or requirement to ask for any subject matter experts outside of that, as long as they are not considered members of that subcommittee or task group, then that would be appropriate. Let's see, Greg Agvent.
Yeah, hey, Gary. First off, on the surface, this sounds like a potentially very useful task subcommittee. But what I'm struggling with is what's the potential product, and what was the kind of story behind the story here? How was this birthed? What is the goal for this standing subcommittee from the FAA's perspective?
A large piece of it is to streamline some of the timeliness of from the time a tasking is issued to the time a task group or a subcommittee is formed, and then get those recommendations back through the DAC to the FAA for action. Having a standing subcommittee streamlines some of that process for having to go through any approvals for any non-DAC members. And again, we'll have to, as we move forward with this, you know, we'll work out some of the intricacies and the exact details, but that's the genesis for the reason behind the standing subcommittee.
And if I may here, Gary, we're not treading new ground here. The Next Gen Advisory Committee, which has been in existence for over 10 years, has had a standing Next Gen subcommittee, excuse me. And where the value is in exactly what Gary said. The standing committee can get on taskings immediately. The subcommittee can determine whether outside expertise is needed and how much, and they can engage the members and the members can engage the subcommittee on a given tasking about their level of interest immediately, as opposed to sort of reinventing the wheel every time a new subject or tasking comes up. So a subcommittee allows us, and you, actually, the members, to be a lot more agile.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a comment or question from James Burgess?
Thanks. I was going to make a comment about the previous tasking, so I can save that for the general Q&A at the end of the day.
Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. If there's nothing else, I'll turn it back over to the DAC chair, Michael.
Gary, this is Robbie. I have my hand raised. I have a question.
Okay.
So just wanted to just raise the question about has the FAA considered a number of potential topics for this subcommittee on the technology front. Just to kind of float a few ideas of mine, what are you thinking about? And one thing could very well be is that this is a national technology policy issue right now is the evolution of 5G, next gen cellular networks. And as y'all know, many of these small drones are going to have some sort of, touch point on that network. So there's a lot of different policy and technology issues, security issues associated with that. Is that something that's fair game for this subcommittee or what? Over.
Gary, this is Jay.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
Hey, Robbie, the subcommittee doesn't obviate the process of doing the tasking the same way we're doing the tasking, that comes from the DFO to the DAC and then is accepted. We're always open to ideas about what good taskings would be. This is really about facilitating moving quickly and efficiently to execute against tasking. So it's not trying to set a tasking agenda.
Okay, copy that. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other DAC members that have a comment or a question? Not seeing anything, so I will turn it over to the DAC chair, Michael.
Thank you, Gary. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the creation of a Standing Operations and Technology Committee.
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to approving the creation of a Standing Operations and Technology Committee? Hearing no objections, the motion to approve the creation of a Standing Operations and Technology Committee is approved. It is my privilege to announce that Houston Mills from UPS has agreed to take on the role of being chair for the Operations and Technology Subcommittee. Houston and I will work with the DAC members and review recommendations on subcommittee participants. Also, we will ensure we comply with the policies regarding subcommittee membership. We have one final business agenda item that is an opportunity for the DAC members to present any new business items or to recommend any future meeting agenda topics. Are there any DAC members at this time that wish to present new business items?
Yes, Michael, it's Houston. First of all, thank you for the honor to help be part of the subcommittee. Looking forward to working with everyone with that. Very exciting. I do have a thought for consideration for potential tasks, at least the thought process. We know under the Part 135 certificates, as Wing, UPS, Amazon, I know others are working towards to continue to move that segment of the industry forward. One of the cumbersome processes that we've been made aware of has to do with the certification process. And certainly we believe that there's an opportunity to perhaps explore. I mean, early on when we did the tasking for looking at opportunities to improve the exemption process, there might be an opportunity to look at the type certification process. As technology moves very quickly, the current process just isn't able to keep up. And certainly the 44807 is out there, but again, the feedback that we've received is it still is a little cumbersome, and the type of agility that will be needed to move forward might be a great opportunity to kind of look at the existing process and make some recommendations on how we could assist. So that's what I would throw out there to the team.
Captain Mills, this is Jay Merkel again. That's a good topic. We will take that under consideration for future DAC tasking. And just to be clear, we have 3 Part 135 certificates currently. Yours at UPS Flight Forward, Wing, Aviation LLC, and now Amazon Prime Air. And we've got 3 that are very close. And yes, you're right. We would like to sunset the 44807 process and move everyone into a more standard airworthiness determination. So it's a good thing to consider.
Thanks, Jay.
Are there any other items to discuss?
If appropriate, Michael, I was just going to make a quick comment with regards to the previous tasking about remote ID for manned aviation. I just wanted to say I appreciated everyone's comments today. I think, as mentioned, we'll have a robust conversation about that. And just for what it's worth, for those that don't know my aviation background outside of wing, it was actually RC modeling that got me into this whole industry at a young age. And I'm still an avid RC modeler, as well as a member of AOPA and aircraft owner. And I had to go through the pain myself about installing ADS-B in the aircraft I'm a partner in, and also a licensed and certified paragliding instructor and fly under Part 103. So I look forward to the opportunity to work with that tasking group and wear those multiple hats to make sure we come up with recommendations that are sensitive to all users of the airspace. We'll be sending out, as Michael mentioned, notes following this on how to get engaged and working with all of you to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no other items to discuss, I'd like to turn it over to our designated federal officer, Dan, for his closing remarks.
Hey, thank you, Michael. And thanks again to all of you for taking the time to prepare and present your recommendations to the FAA. I feel this has been I don't know about the rest of you, but a more productive meeting than the last couple. And the last couple we've had have been very productive. So considering the circumstances and where we are today in our country with the pandemic, and particularly the impact that this virus has had on the aerospace and the aviation sector, I'm just really happy and proud of the effort that you all have been putting in, and I thank you. I also am excited about some of the ideas that are coming forward. In aviation, we are always interested in transparency, as Gur pointed out. So on the safety front, finding out a way for this sector to self-disclose and talk about safety issues is critically important. And as far as situational awareness, Mark's points were very good. Obviously, and as a pilot myself, the last thing you want is introducing more items, more tasks, more bells and whistles in your cockpit, especially in the cockpits of aircraft that are primarily VFR, see and avoid. You need to have your head up and outside over 80% of the time. But to Gur's point, technology always seems to find a way. And who knows in the future what technology will bring. And I agree with the concept of not distracting pilots unless the threat is close enough that it needs the pilot's attention. And that could, we could be looking at all cockpits being heads-up displays, the windscreens being heads-up displays in the future. Who knows? But that's what makes this industry so exciting, is there's no limit to what we can do. And we've proven that over time, we also have a very good industry, has a very good knack for ultimately making things affordable so that they can be widely distributed. So thanks for all the work today that you all have done and all of the consideration that's been given to this situation that we are in as a country. And Michael, if you have any final thoughts.
So I'd like to thank everyone who participated in making this DAC meeting successful, including Dan, Jay, and everyone at the FAA, our DAC members, and my special advisor, Diana Cooper. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and staying up to date on the great work that this committee has been undertaking. For those of you interested in serving on the subcommittee, please reach out to our subcommittee chair, Houston Mills at UPS. And for participation in the remote ID task group, please connect with our task group chair, James Burgess at Wings. As always, Diana and I are here to assist if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to reconvening at our next meeting, tentatively scheduled for February in 2021. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn the DAC meeting?
Moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion to adjourn has been seconded. Are there any objections to adjourning today's DAC meeting? Hearing no objections, the motion to adjourn the meeting is approved. This DAC meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you.